Hey everyone, Jay here. Just wanted to mention that I am currently offering a special discounted rate on my Deeper Learning teacher training program. If you've been listening to the show and you're looking to expand your knowledge base even further, maybe you would like to deepen your personal inquiry into yoga and become a teacher, or maybe you are already a teacher and you're looking for a way to reinvigorate what you're doing. If so, this might be the right moment to take advantage of this limited time offer. Get 20% off the regular price. The program is a little different than many others in that it does not require you to follow a set linear curriculum. It's designed to be a co-creative process that fits to your life and adapts to your needs. No hoops that you have to jump through, just valuable resources and opportunities to explore with other like-minded folks. You can start anytime, and there are different payment options available. And for a limited time, you can get a special discounted rate. I encourage you to check it out. To find out more and register, go to jbrownyoga.com/training. All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to whoever you are. Whether you are a new listener or a returning friend, I could not be more grateful to you for choosing to listen. And I'm wondering in this moment as I say that, how you are listening. Specifically, what device or app are you using to listen to this podcast? According to the data that I get from my podcast hosting service, about half of you are listening to this on your Apple iPhone using the native Apple Podcasts app. Then there is a smaller percentage of you who are listening via Spotify. And then there's some folks who are like on random other podcast apps, or the real Luddites who are actually listening to this on my website. And if that's you, I love you. I love you. But I'm really asking because I'm sitting here feeling amazed by the fact that I have this resource and technology just at my disposal. It is a relatively newish thing in the course of my life that someone can literally produce their own radio show with a microphone and a laptop in their attic and garner listeners. And some people have even turned that into like big time shows, not like this one where we have like a nice little loyal listenership, but it's nothing crazy. Although if you look at the like statistics for podcasts, I'm actually very high up. Like you don't have to get that many listens in a month to actually beat most podcasts. Like a lot of podcasts don't get many downloads. So in any case, I have been amazed again and again over the years as to how having a podcast can, in certain ways, bypass the normal avenues for like putting something out there or like creating online content or media. And I think that's why I've stuck with it so consistently over the last 9 years now, because in a way, podcasting is one of the last truly decentralized mediums where someone can like create and put something out. Like, I don't know if people listening to this know the back end tech of a podcast, but it runs on what's called RSS feeds. And as of right now, RSS feeds are still like decentralized and owned independently, and you can have control over your own show. And that's pretty incredible, the way that technology has made that possible. And I think that's true also in the area of online yoga instruction. I imagine most of the yoga teachers listening to this show over the last few years, at some point, even if you didn't stick with it, you taught some classes online. One, because the world fell apart and we all had to because we were locked down. We had no other choice. But also because I think there's always been this promise of the internet being a way for people to kind of expand to the world rather than just your own little local neighborhood. And that is certainly true in a lot of regards. And I think that it's changed. It's changed over the years. When I first started doing stuff online and kind of garnering a little bit of an audience or an online presence, the internet was a totally different place than it is now. And I've kind of retreated into this podcast. I'm not doing anything else. I don't do any other social media. I'm just doing this show and just like making this thing that's meaningful for me. And that is like, feels important for me to be doing for my own learning. And then I'm putting it out there and you're choosing to listen to it right now. And there's just not a lot of places where you can do that in such a clean and simple, pure way like that. And like if I just were posting stuff on social media, you know, the chances that my followers or the people who've whatever clicked the follow button on my profile are going to actually see that is very unclear and very often not happening. And with podcast, if somebody follows my podcast, then they get it delivered directly to them from me, from my attic to your ear. And that's very pure. Now, at the same time, as many of you know, I have been teaching yoga classes online for many years, and that certainly has proved to be valuable. In fact, I was reflecting the other day that if I think in my mind to like the people I know in my life through practice, like the people who come to my classes, and I just envision their faces like, oh, the recognizable regulars, you know, you're kind of regular folks. I have some of those folks online who don't come to live classes as much as they used to, but they show up every once in a while. And in fact, more of the people that are in my mind that I know as my friends through practice are online than in person. And I think that's why I opened the yoga center, is that I felt like I wanted to kind of return back to just like my local mile. Now, having said that, I do think over the last few years, especially, there has been some really distinct shifts online. And most of the time, honestly, yoga teachers don't talk about the back end stuff because, I don't know, there's just like a thing where you don't like share your trade secrets or something. I mean, maybe that's not true. Maybe some teachers are more transparent about it, but a lot of times the teachers who have like effective marketing have somebody like a team who's tapped into kind of trends and understands marketing and online business and is helping consult and guide the yoga teacher as to like what to create, when to put it out, how much to charge, like all that stuff. And many of you know, I had a partner I was working with for a number of years who helped me do that. And I've just observed, especially over the last year, I would say, especially, there's been this really marked shift, and I've been noticing it and wanting to speak with someone about it. And today is the day. My guest is Emily Smith. And Emily was a producer for 8 years at Yoga International. Many of you listening must know Yoga International was affiliated with the Himalayan Institute. They had a magazine for a long time, and then Emily got a job being a producer there right when they were switching from the print magazine to a digital platform. And she saw that evolution, and then she left right before they got sold. And she nowadays is doing something called Yogaversity, which is what I would think of as a smaller curated platform that features a really wonderful roster of experienced teachers. And we discuss how she managed to get that roster of people on board. And I think there's a lot of reasons why people want to work with Emily. And I just thoroughly enjoyed talking some shop with her and getting her perspective on the former and current state of online yoga industry. Great pleasure to have a chance to meet her and speak with her. And I'm very glad to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you're enjoying this show and you would like to make sure that it continues, then maybe you would consider becoming a supporter and gaining access to the full-length archives by becoming a podcast premium subscriber. Longtime listeners know in the past we did ads and other things to try to raise some funds to help support this operation. And these days, the only way the podcast brings in any revenue is through the podcast premium subscriptions. And for anybody who is currently subscribed, I just want to take a moment to say how much I appreciate that. It really makes a big difference. And, speaking about the data I get when I look at how many people subscribe compared to how many people listen every week, I must admit sometimes it makes me feel away. And I don't know, I'm just putting it out there that if you are a regular listener and you're in a position to support the show for as little as $5 a month, then maybe you would consider becoming a podcast premium subscriber. I also got lots of other stuff, live classes, discussion groups, on-demand videos, all the usual stuff, and everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay. All right. I think we're going to leave it there. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Emily Smith. Hello.
Hi, it's Emily here.
Hi, Emily. Nice to meet you. I'm Jay.
It's nice to meet you. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm already recording, and I'd like for us to consider ourselves having just begun, if that's okay with you.
Perfect.
Very cool. I'm so happy to have this moment to speak with you. We are brought together here by a mutual friend. You were recommended to me by our friend, Bernie Clark. Shout out to Bernie.
Absolutely.
And I think the reason Bernie mentioned you to me is I had been talking on the show about the post-pandemic landscape for yoga teachers. And some of that conversation, a lot of it was around the in-person, is stuff coming back? Are yoga centers opening back up or not? The change in sort of the international circuit and stuff. But one of the areas that I haven't talked so much about that I think might be interesting to talk about today is what the online space looks like, because I feel like it's changed a lot over the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that? Do you think it's changed over the years a lot?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely started changing even before the pandemic, but the pandemic was the biggest catalyst for change in terms of online yoga.
Right.
And we've seen so much change even since then. And the prediction of where it's going is very difficult to see. But there's a lot of cool things happening there too.
Yeah, I'm not putting it on us to try to predict or know what's going to happen, because I think that would be silly of us. But I am curious to hear from you because you have a different perspective than maybe a lot of other yoga teachers. I don't know much about you. I have to say you have a pretty light digital footprint, more so than most. Is that on purpose?
Partially. I'm definitely more comfortable behind the camera than in front of a microphone or in front of a camera. So most of my work has been in producing content and working with teachers to create courses, classes, to put themselves in front of this, digital audience. So I work with a lot of the teachers that you'll end up seeing online, but I'm not the voice that's sharing it usually.
Got you.
Yeah.
Yoga teachers need people like you to help them produce stuff. Now, the one thing I did know about you is that you were an executive producer for 8 years at Yoga International. When did that start? When did you start working at Yoga International?
Yeah, so it's actually an interesting transition. as it were. I had moved to the Himalayan Institute. Are you familiar with that?
Sure. Yes, of course. I remember they had the place on Fifth Avenue in New York City. And
Yes.
yes, I'm familiar with Himalayan Institute.
And they have a retreat center. It used to be more of an ashram, now more of a retreat center in northeastern Pennsylvania. And I had moved there to study and practice. So that's where I have done like most of my initial training in yoga is through the ashram there. And from the Himalayan Institute, from Yoga International as a print magazine, it transitioned to digital while I was there. It was actually like quite the perfect timing. So I got in when it was a team of, I think it was 8 people at the very start of Yoga International, doing all of these print articles to digital and starting to get into that, like, what does a yoga studio look like online conversation? And like, how can we transition this to make some of these really world-class teachers available to students all around the world? So that was like a really cool time to be in the yoga space when it was just like, we were figuring everything out. Everything was trial and error, what works, what doesn't work. And so that was like 2013, 2014 when that first started.
I see. So you started out just working on the print magazine.
So I started out literally in the transition to digital. So we were like scrubbing through all of the print issues, seeing what to transition over. And, shout out to Yoga International, the print magazine. Everything was done so rigorously that the quality of those articles was, really amazing. So we had this huge resource and online library already to start with, which is, of course, anybody in the digital space knows, really huge for getting started, period.
Yes, I do remember the magazine, like yoga dorks like me back then. That was like, it wasn't Yoga Journal. It was like these substantive articles that were like more in depth, if I recall.
Exactly. And that was like the intention, I think, with it was to be kind of the alternative space to find learning materials, but especially for really dedicated students. So it wasn't as much, about the flashy clothes or like what cover model we can get, but more so about what content can we put in there, how can we highlight these teachings, all of that kind of stuff.
Right. And I think that was also a time like early aughts where it was like the blogosphere time, like before Facebook and all the other social media apps. We like WordPress came out and we all started like publishing little bits and articles. And I think that's kind of around when, the print magazines started to be like, oh yeah, we got to get our stuffs online too.
Exactly. So there was like that space opening up. And like a few people had done online classes. And of course, there were like DVDs and, videos with Shiva Ray that you could find at your local grocery store or someplace like that. But there hadn't been a lot of exploration into what does a yoga class look like online and like how do we capture it and put it there. So that was kind of the transition that we were a part of. And there is a lot, like there's a big learning curve there, as I'm sure you know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I remember like when Yoga Glow came out.
Yes.
And that was like kind of a big deal. And there was like a little controversy right at the beginning because they tried to like copyright a camera angle or something, if I remember.
Yeah, it was honestly a huge boon to Yoga International. They sent like a cease and desist letter to YI from filming a yoga class from the back of the classroom, which is honestly the only place you would really want to film it, if you had a...
Well, the funny part about that is at that time, I was just starting to get into doing video stuff. And it wasn't like now where we all had Zoom and stuff. Like it required like a lot more of a production.
Yes.
To like shoot the videos and produce them was like much more of a thing. And I had met a guy who was like an independent video and music producer. And I remember having a conversation with him and he was telling me about what happened with the musicians and how when stuff went online, they all got jacked because they no longer like made direct money off of their album sales. And it was all like pennies on the algorithm views, and he counseled me. He's like, you don't want to be on Yoga Glow. You want to make your own platform, which I did. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
But it was like I couldn't have done it on my own. Like if I didn't have him to know how to like produce a video, I couldn't have done it on my own.
100%. And the outlets to get the word out there were so much smaller than they are now with social media. So like an independent purveyor of yoga classes would have to have a huge marketing budget in order to get in front of as many people, obviously, as a Yoga Glow would, or eventually as a Yoga International would. But at that time, too, Facebook was really booming. And so ads on Facebook, articles, things would get passed along in a really helpful way, I'll say, for the online yoga business, because teachers would share things with their students or with each other
Right.
in a way that I think, because the internet's become so much more busy, is much, much harder to do now.
Oh yeah, I feel like it was a much more innocent time on the internet where like if you posted something on Facebook, the people who were on your friend list actually saw it.
Yeah.
Like there was a moment, I can't remember what year it was, where it felt like, oh, the algorithm changed and it no longer, like people who were able to build these massive Instagram followers, you couldn't do it anymore like they did,
Yeah. 100%. It definitely shifted, and it changed the way that I think most of those bigger companies have to do business, because you couldn't rely on organic growth anymore. So it became a lot of paid advertising from my perspective,
Which is weird because those advertising tools like target people, and I've like tried to use them at one point, and if you're not somebody who's minded in a marketing way, it can suck your soul a little.
Oh my gosh, it takes like a lot of reorientation to figure out how, as like a yoga practitioner and somebody who believes in a lot of these, tenets, also participates in a marketing world, because yeah, you are just like constantly trying to, put your product or information in front of other people who don't already have it. So it becomes like this consumerist,
Yeah.
that people are playing. But I do think that there's a way to do it that honors the intention of the practice that we're sharing.
Yes,
So
we'll
like
get to that. We'll get to how to do it in a way that's not gross.
Yeah.
Other thing I would say about Yoga Glow that's funny to me is I remember when whatever they like tried to copyright the camera angle, and that's how we learned to use that kind of camera angle. We're like, oh, that's better, that putting it lower in the back of the room with like a little pathway to the teacher, and then having people on both sides of that was kind of a great way to do it. And then we ended up doing it that way because they figured it out. They're like, that's the good angle. So
I know, totally. It was like a nice way to film. And it's funny because it does like make it way more visible that that's a nice way to film. But then as you keep filming, you learn like, okay, what does it take to have yoga students in the room? What if they're doing the wrong thing the whole time, which is maybe fine for your own production.
Yeah.
And then like if people are self-conscious and they're always on camera, it's just so much nicer, in my opinion, for like a bigger production to have just the teacher, and for community-sized productions to have teachers and students. Like I feel like there's a time and a place for each to become relevant. I'm curious what you think about that.
I mean, I think it's certainly just from like a production standpoint, way easier when it's just the teacher and a camera.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times what we did, and I did this, where you'd get like one person or two people, so the teacher doesn't have to demonstrate everything necessarily. But as I was saying, it did require like a pretty big budget and like some money. You had to have some money up front to kind of make it happen, to pay for everything, like get a space and shoot it and light it and all that.
Yeah, the space rental, and then outside of that, the gear is really expensive. So if you're investing in it for yourself, or, like I know it on a larger scale for a company versus for like a single individual, but as an individual, I think it would be really difficult to maintain unless you were really business savvy, because you're right, it is just a lot of time, effort, and like upfront cost. So if you have like the finances to do that, or had the finances to do that, I think it's a really cool thing to do, or the connections. But there was like a lot higher like barrier to entry than there is now, I think, in terms of getting online, obviously.
Yeah, that's right. And then initially, like the first video I made, we did print it out as a DVD, but we knew it was a dead technology, We did it as like a throwback because Rodney, he had a DVD. I wanted to have a DVD too.
Yeah.
But I think I still have a box of them up in my attic.
Well, that's
But
awesome.
at a certain point, it did start to become about like online delivery. I think first I was using like YouTube live stream.
Yeah.
Um,
Were you doing
but
a subscription-based model? Like,
at first, yes, that was
yeah.
the kind of move that my business partner said. He's like, online has to be a subscription before everybody else was doing that.
Yeah.
And we can talk about why that is because I've talked about that. Like right now, I just opened a center in person in my neighborhood like 4 months ago, and
Oh,
it's
great.
basically like cash, like $15 per person per class in the box or Venmo, you know?
Yeah, that's so nice.
Yeah, because it cuts down all the admin and everything. But compared to online, it really needs and wants to be a subscription, I think.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess I'm curious when you first started working on doing the online stuff for Yoga International, I kind of remember a moment where, I don't know, there was a bit of a talk around about like teachers getting a bit exploited by Yoga Glow. Like the initial adopters kind of got the sweetheart deals. But later
Yeah.
on, like you were just awash. There was like so many classes and teachers on there. It wasn't like Yoga Glow was really bringing new people to a teacher. And I remember when my business partner said to me, he said, listen, you've been spending the last 10 years developing your teaching. This is like your intellectual property. And if you let someone else pay to produce a video of your teaching, generally speaking, they own the video.
Yeah.
And it became a thing. And I remember at one point, like Yoga Journal was giving a much better deal to teachers than like other sites. If I recall, I don't know. Do you remember kind of like how you were working it with the teachers initially?
Yeah, I definitely remember that. I mean, it was so at Yoga International, it was also an interesting thing because we were moving from a nonprofit magazine as part of the Himalayan Institute to a for-profit company.
Mm,
And so we had some, we'll say, some pretty limited funds.
mm,
And so it was essentially, a teacher would get, and there were different phases of this. So depending on what phase a teacher was introduced, they would be in a different category because we did evolve the pay structure like really substantially during my time there, where teachers started off getting paid, not very much. Well, I don't know how much it would be compared to what you would expect to get paid, but like essentially paid for that class in a substantial way. Like you're paid for your time to teach the class, but in the way that you kind of acknowledged, it was really difficult to like respect all of the work that goes into that teacher being able to teach that class, all of the
right.
training, all of the hours, and it's really hard to do that. It is really hard to do that on a small budget. So the evolution of that went from, paying teachers, I think to start at the very beginning, it was like a payment for the filming. And then every month we would also pay an additional bonus if the classes got viewed, because we started off with so few viewers that we wanted to prioritize the teachers that were getting views. But that's
Mm.
problematic too, because there's content that we think deserves to be there and needs to be there and needs to be compensated for, even if the views aren't as high. I hope this isn't super boring to your
No,
listeners.
no, it's not. And like, how do you calculate? Like, is it a per view
Well,
amount? Like,
to start, it was literally just a ratio in terms of view comparison. So, like we'll take the number of views and then like if there's 10 teachers on the site to start with, like depending on where they fell in that lineup, they would get a certain bonus because they've already been paid for filming. So there was that piece of it. And then after that, we switched to like paying a more substantial rate upfront for filming because frankly, we got so many classes and so many teachers that to like distribute funds after that would be really complicated.
mm,
And then we kind of ended with some longer term relationships with some of the teachers that would be like an annual payment. I don't know if technically it would be considered annual, but for the year they would be paid a certain amount of money that would include them teaching classes, a couple of mini courses, and maybe doing one live class or something like that. So it
mm.
made teachers a little bit more a part of the community and it let us build up a following for them in a way that we couldn't if they were just coming in once to film. So of all of the ways that we worked with teachers, that was definitely my preference. It limited how many teachers you could work with over the course of a given year, but it gave you the opportunity to go a lot deeper with those teachers. And then those teachers would say, I had, 5 people in my last teacher training that found me on Yoga International and then traveled to Asheville or wherever to come and take my training. So it was really cool to see that translation into real life too.
Yeah, people finding you online and then that bringing them to you in
Yeah,
person is kind of an ideal in some ways.
for sure.
Um, well, I guess I'm curious about as time goes on, though, there does kind of, I don't know when it was, but there was maybe you said even before the pandemic, there did sort of hit maybe like a kind of saturation point, or what were you thinking when you said that?
Yeah, so I think that honestly, people started to become aware, I feel like, of how many subscriptions they had. And this is like 100% my personal opinion. I have no data to back this up, but I do
Yeah.
think like you kind of get into subscription overload. And if you feel like you're not getting the value for that subscription because you're not visiting the site to take a class,
Mm,
um, then there's a reason to cancel it. And you saw this with a lot of the bigger companies. So like the Disneys, the, HBOs, everybody went in their own direction for a long time and built up their audience and their subscriptions. And then everybody was like, okay, maybe we're actually stronger together and started like combining. If you buy this subscription, then you get access to this, this, and this. And I think in some ways the yoga industry saw a little bit of that,
yeah.
but maybe not in a way that's necessarily the most beneficial for students or for the classes or platforms. But it did seem like subscription-based services started to struggle. I mean, you see like outside of the yoga sphere, you see Peloton like on top of
Hmm.
the world at the start of the pandemic, and now, cutting their operations in huge quantities. So I feel like that is something that's not unique to yoga, but definitely is felt in the yoga world in terms of like big industry yoga.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it was like my business partner friend, he was the one who was saying, look at what Netflix and everybody's doing. You got to have a subscription price that's as low as you can make it in a way,
Yeah.
because people will kind of keep a subscription going sometimes, even if they're not using it that much.
Hmm.
And trying to like have people like pay per class like we were in person online wasn't as good. Like a lot
Yeah.
of times it almost worked like a little bit of like a Patreon where people wanted to support me. I've got
Yes.
people who've been paying me $7 a month for like the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So I do think that it made sense to switch over to subscriptions, but kind of like when yoga teachers were teaching at centers and you became a senior teacher and a certain time you start to run numbers.
Yeah.
And you start to be like, oh, wait a second. I don't know if I'm getting a cut that I deserve, because you feel like you're bringing the people in more than the center.
Yes. I
And
think that there is definitely that. And I think what the point you made makes total sense, which is that like the cost of subscriptions had to increase, as operations increase in certain ways, like depending on how each company is building. And so like you being able to keep your subscription at $7, like I would love to support you for $7, but to pay somebody, $20 a month and to know I'm subscribing to another thing and another thing, it
yeah,
just becomes totally unsustainable financially unless you're actually using it, which is like, kind of like the little gold nugget in there because you can connect students. I live in northeastern Pennsylvania. There's not, a ton of teachers where I live.
hmm,
So for me to be able to take an online class and then be inspired for when I go teach a yoga class is like definitely worth $20 a month. But if you're not using it,
yeah.
then that's expensive over the course of a year. And yeah, and I think people started to realize it.
Yeah, I was very resistant to doing online classes. And I remember arguing with my friend about it. And then he told me, you have to do it. He's like, if you're going to not renew the lease on your yoga center and you're going to move away, and all these people you've met over the last decade aren't going to have any way to connect with you. But if you do this, they will, because you can teach class from anywhere.
Yeah.
And he was right. And I certainly did that. And I moved to Pennsylvania too. I'm in Easton, by the way.
Oh my gosh. So I just moved to Stroudsburg. So I'm very
Okay.
close to you.
All right, we're in the same area. Well, in any
Yeah.
case, I think that it's interesting to me how there was this progression. We moved online, there was the blogs, and then it did turn to video and subscription services. And even before, like you said, even before the pandemic, where like everything went online and there was kind of like a sort of online boom of sorts, there was this thing of like, I just remember like Allo getting bought out and
Yeah.
Keno McGregor getting all upset because now her videos about potty positivity were owned by people that she didn't like, or, like there was a thing. And if I'm not mistaken, at some point, Yoga International got sold. Isn't that right?
Yeah, they got sold. Why I got sold, I actually left a couple of months before they got sold, but they got sold, I want to say 2021, the end of 2021, the beginning of 2022, I think, to Gaia.
Yeah.
And so it went from being like a pretty robust operation with, a lot of employees, to like a pretty tight operation within, the Gaia sphere, which I also have no idea about because I haven't been there since they got sold. But I do know that, anytime you make that dramatic of a change, it shifts like business operations, what you're looking at, what you're producing, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm always curious to see what they're coming out with now.
Well, it's interesting. I had thought that it was maybe earlier than 2021 because it seems like 2021 and 2022 were like the years where like I actually made a living online for the first time only.
Yeah.
And there was that crazy boom because we were all locked down and everybody was online and that's all we were doing.
I know. It was like a great place to be if you already had a yoga or like, an online presence, and especially in the yoga world and or fitness world when the pandemic happened, because then all of a sudden everybody just had their computers and were ready to practice.
Yeah.
So then, a lot of teachers ended up and studios ended up scrambling to get online presences just to sustain themselves, obviously, and like keep going through the pandemic and support, their teachers and their own livelihoods. And so a place like Yoga International or even a Yoga Glow was like already set up to succeed through the pandemic.
Right.
I think for that reason, it was probably a pretty good time for the owners to sell, but I don't have
Is that, I guess
right.
that's my question. Like, why would you sell if you were kind of primed to be one of the main hubs?
I do think it was probably that. I think it was probably, hey, we know what we have and we know it's like value right now. And a post-pandemic world is pretty hard to predict. So, we're going to do
Let's
this.
cash in now.
Yeah.
From not for profit to cash out.
Yeah. So I feel like that was kind of the transition that why I made. And yeah, I mean, I'd be so curious. I don't have any connections to Yoga Glow. I'd be so curious to see how they're doing. But I know that they had like a much, I'd say, tighter operation in terms of at the start what they were, their teachers. There were a lot of Anyasara, former Anyasara teachers on there, a few Ashtanga teachers, and some really awesome teachers that really took off. But yeah, I'd be curious now that they've transitioned to doing Pilates too. It's like,
I didn't know that. They opened it up, but they got sold too. It became Glow or whatever, if I'm not mistaken.
And so they're just Glow and yeah, Pilates and yoga, I think it is. So, and they're, I think, based in LA. This is all projection. So I think they're still based in LA. And so they're kind of, it seems like following the trends and the demands out there. But yeah, I'd be curious to know how they're doing too.
Yeah, me too. I know that like there was a couple of just big teachers like Jason Crandall or whatever who just got good deals with them and it's worked out well for them. I remember when I had Jason Crandall on the show years ago, he talked about that relationship very favorably. I don't know if that was true for all the yoga teachers who ended up on those, because I do think if you weren't somebody who had a little like cachet or like online presence, you definitely got lost in the mix usually.
Yeah, it is easy to get lost in the mix, I think. And it's nice that like some of the teachers were able to like find quote unquote like a breakout role for themselves, because most teachers have good hearts coming into it and do have a lot to teach. And if they end up on the platforms, hopefully it's for like good reasons because they've studied for so long and practiced for so long. But it was easy to get lost in the mix, I'll say. And if the audience is big enough, then like even if you're a smaller fish in that online mix, the students will still find you, So I will say that there's room for, it does feel like there's room for everybody. I don't know if that's your experience or your
I
experience.
would say so. I think that one of the things that happened when everybody got locked down and everything went online and teachers started teaching classes from their living rooms, but for the center,
Mhm.
at some point they did realize, like, hey, wait a second. I could just do my own classes from my living
Yeah,
room. I don't have to be doing classes through the center. I think a lot of teachers wanted to support the centers that they
sure.
were working through. But I remember at one point, I actually, with my business partner, we did like a kind of workshop for people online during the pandemic to kind of just show them, like, I had people who had, like whatever, like an email list of like 40 people, but
Hmm.
like five of them wanted to come every week.
Yeah.
And they were kind of like making more money than some of these other teachers. That you didn't need like a big email list. If you had people who really wanted to practice with you and were willing to support you, then you could kind of get your own little thing going on. And I think a lot of teachers did that.
That is so cool to see. And it's like a nice, so I feel like the way that the yoga industry has grown is like not vertically, but horizontally. So there's
Mm.
been like a ton of growth horizontally in terms of more people becoming yoga teachers, but we're not seeing the same like yoga celebrities, frankly, that we used to.
Yeah.
Um, it's like almost like a democratization. And there's pros actually, I think, to having yoga celebrities because, it just makes it more visible. Some of these teachers have studied for, 50 plus years and put like their entire life's work towards developing these programs. But it's cool because it becomes a little bit more community based, like you said. Like there's
Mm.
that one person that's teaching those five students every week and has a relationship with them. So if one of them doesn't show up, they're going to be like, "Are you okay? What happened this week?" It's just a totally different field than the big yoga industry.
Yeah,
That,
sure. Different than like going to a conference with like 80 other people in the room or
yes.
something.
And that's how we found our yoga teachers, right? For a
A
long
lot of
time,
us.
like
Yeah.
yoga journal conferences and like other symposiums to like try to figure out who to study with. And those things are so good for curiosity. So it's like kind of exciting to see a few of them pop back up. Um, because if you are curious, it can be hard to find the teacher that you want to study with or the path that you want to follow, especially if you live in a smaller or rural area. So, yeah.
True. Yeah, interesting to hear you say that. I'm kind of glad that you said that you don't think there's as much yoga celebrity as there used to be, because I think that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I just remember there was kind of a circuit, and I was always a little bit of like a B-lister, but I was on the circuit,
Cool.
and I don't think it's the same anymore.
Yeah.
There's a
The
few people who still got some cachet, but like not like it used to be, right? There's not like magazine covers and all of that like there used to be for yoga teachers or Nike sponsorships or whatever.
I know it's super different now. And like, a person with 2,000 followers on Instagram might be like at this point, like what we might previously consider a yoga celebrity just because of their reach to their specific audience, if it is yoga for arthritis or, whatever. Um, but I'll be curious to see how it changes the way that teacher trainings go.
Mm,
So I'm working on a project now called Yogaversity.
right.
And the whole idea behind this project, it's kind of like a continuation of the piece that I was really passionate about at Yoga International, which is the training and course development, because I think there's so many opportunities for people to find like really applicable ways for their yoga to integrate into their life or, into their work if they are yoga teachers. So
Mm,
it's for yoga teachers specifically. And our whole, goal is to bring out that curiosity in people and to let people find those teachers that speak to them. So if it's yoga of 12-step recovery or something about Ayurveda and how that is going to help us transition through seasons or help you work one-on-one with clients or, with your yoga students, just giving teachers an outlet to continue to learn, I think is going to be really important. And I'm curious to see how we end up finding our new yoga teachers because it doesn't seem as clear as it used to be.
mm-mm.
Um, and it's neat to be a part of the evolving process. And I truly have no predictions as to where they'll come from.
No,
Um,
me neither. Me neither. Like I said, we don't need to know. I guess what I'm curious about is one of the other big kind of transitions that I observed that I went through too was moving away, maybe not completely, but certainly a lot from doing what I call like an on-demand video where you have the whole video shoot and you produce a video and it's like a standalone thing that someone buys versus like ongoing live Zoom classes.
Mm-hmm.
Did Yoga International start doing just like live classes before they sold, or did they sell it off before we fully transitioned?
So we started doing live classes at the beginning of the pandemic, and they did really well. It was cool to see like 230 students in a class, or like it really does make a difference practicing together, and that's like, I don't know. I don't think it's something that you can trade in. So for as long as I've been in the online yoga industry, I still think that going to an in-person class or practicing with other people is extremely beneficial. We hosted a live class on Yogaversity on Monday, and we had 88 people there. And, it's a brand new thing. And so it was just so exciting. And just to be with other people practicing at a time when things are, like very much in flux in the United States was so helpful. So Yoga International had started doing those live classes, and I honestly can't say if they're still doing live classes or not. I kind of think they paused from it. I know other companies went really hard into the live classes. Like YogaWorks was doing a very high number of live classes per week at the start of the pandemic. I know Kino's platform has live classes still. People like practicing together, which is, I think, worth keeping, and it puts something on somebody's schedule. Whereas if you have an on-demand class, it's both yours to take whenever you want, and it's difficult to make the time. Is that what you found?
I did. I have found that. And I mean, it's interesting because now you have the on-demand videos that you might produce, and I've produced a few of those. And now those are really like wanted to have like, like higher production value, but then now we have all the Zoom classes, and then you have the replays of the Zoom classes. So the live classes can also be kind of like taken on demand as well. But I definitely proved it to myself that you can have real yoga with people online. And I mean, even like more recently, I just had people who practiced with me for several years online. And then I actually went to where they lived and met them in person and kind of confirmed it for myself. Yeah, that's a real friendship. And that's real yoga that we had together. 100%. So I totally agree that, the online space is definitely fruitful still for people to learn stuff. And I have a teacher training that I'm doing online as well.
Oh, cool.
I guess about that, how much of like the courses you're doing for Yogaversity or trainings you're doing for Yogaversity, is it a mix of like on-demand and live stuff, or is it more just like pre-recorded stuff that people watch?
So it's a mix. So one thing to go back to the last conversation, which is, I think it's really interesting how on-demand yoga classes have changed people's attention span for yoga. Because
what do you mean by that?
I think that the online yoga class, if it's on demand, the ability to get people into the class and to complete the class, like even up to 90%.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jaybrownyoga.com/premium.